Our next one is titled How to Find the Line Between Allowing Them to Express Emotions and Crying Over Everything. I want to teach my son that it's okay to express his emotions and that all emotions are okay to feel. I allow him to cry and hold him and let him know that I'm there, but he's 3 now and every little thing makes him cry. He hung something on the wall and it fell and he starts crying when we could easily just hang it up and fix it. I moved his toy to a different spot and he didn't want it moved, so he starts crying. Usually I tell him it's okay to cry and get it out, but lately I've been saying, is it really worth crying over, or is it something that we can fix? Or instead of crying, just tell mommy you don't want something done. How do you draw the line between allowing them to express feelings and emotions and them crying over minor inconveniences? Now, I don't have a 3-year-old, so this is all very, very theoretical. This is just my extremely theoretical opinion as someone who has not experienced this. My very first knee-jerk response is there a dad here? Because honestly, I can already tell that there's a pretty big difference in the way that I interact with our son and the way that my husband interacts with our son. I'm way more likely, if he's crying, I'm likely to come, hold him, cuddle him, try and soothe him and calm him down. My husband will usually actually just shock him out of it. So he talks in a slightly more stern tone. He says just one thing. It's not mean. It's not shouty. It's nothing like that at all. He doesn't stop him from crying, but he just gives him a distraction and it works almost instantly. And then our son just goes, because he's a baby, he doesn't really care. Usually he's crying because he was shocked. And then you shock him out of the cry and then suddenly he's able to move on and he's playing and he's having fun. So I think that often what happens, there's a maternal instinct here where all you want to do is you want to soothe and calm. And we just have a very, very different natural style towards babies. And I know this is a huge generalization. I accept that not all women are going to be like this, but somehow I feel that a lot of women are going to be like this. And then add to that the fact that I think as a society, we've all developed this idea of toxic masculinity. And one of the things about toxic masculinity is that men are not allowed to cry. And that gives us as mothers the impression of, well, okay, now I have a son. I have to teach my son that it's okay to cry and it's okay to feel emotions and he doesn't need to repress anything. He doesn't need to bottle anything up inside and so on. And that may well be the case. I would argue that there's still a room for us as a society when it comes to having stoic men. And stoicism is actually a really great value to establish in a man. That's something that you would admire and something that you would find good. It's interesting that at the same time as we have this, men should be allowed to cry and express all emotions, and maybe if they talked about their feelings more, women would like them more or be less annoyed by them. And then at the same time to still have this idea of the man baby and the man flu. If men are really sick, then they're much more likely to make a much bigger deal out of it than women are, and so on. So what that says to me is that on a really fundamental level, we do appreciate stoicism just a little bit. And somehow I'm not sold that mothers, that the maternal instinct is the right place to impart stoicism in a young son. Somehow I think that just doesn't come all that naturally to us. And so that's just my feeling. That would be my first question. Now, obviously, I'm projecting, it's all speculation, may have absolutely nothing to do with the context here. She may well have a great relationship with the dad. The dad might be totally involved. But I suspect that if the dad is involved, he does not experience the same sets of behaviors from the child, because the children also adjust how they behave and how they interact with the person that they're dealing with. So that's my first comment to that. The second comment is I do think that there is this point where you let kids dwell in their feelings a little bit too much. And we go way too far in this direction of all emotions are healthy. You should feel everything, express everything. Sometimes it's not actually all that good or healthy to be so focused on everything that you're feeling all the time. You don't need to be so inward focused. Sometimes, and this is kind of the problem that she's running into, you want to try and be a little bit outward focused. So instead of going, oh my God, something happened that I don't like, and then crying and then spending half an hour crying about it because, then you get all the comfort and you get all the cuddles and it feels a bit nice. It's nice to try and teach kids to be a little bit more outward focused. So if something happens that you don't like, the question is, what can you do to change it? Now, I don't have a ton of advice for her. I think if I had a similar problem, I would just observe how my husband interacts with him. And then that's kind of what I would try to emulate, because I'm very sure that my husband just does not have this style. And that's one of the great things about having both parents involved in raising a kid, and having parents of opposite genders as well involved in raising a kid. You really do get a natural difference and a natural balance that comes out, because people have very, very different styles. So I'll read some of the comments where people do have a little bit more experience with this. This person says, I feel like we find that line as mothers as time goes on. When you start to feel like they should be moving on to a different level of rationale and coping skills, it's probably time. My oldest is 13 and I parent fully off instinct and mood now. In the beginning, I would try to remember and follow what all the doctors recommend, but that definitely loosened up as time went on. We know our kids and we know how to guide them through life. If you feel it's time to be a little more rigid to help provide perspective, you're probably right. And then another one replies to this. She says, I fully agree. I feel like kids just continue to get more and more complicated and different as they get older. We really have to be lenient with ourselves and our parenting and just do what feels right. I love that. Good advice. Now, I kind of disagree with both of these. I think that there is some element of instinct that is correct, that you should follow. If your instincts are saying there's something about this behavior that's not right, I should do something to change it, then that's a good sign. I would follow that sign. I think a level of intuition when it comes to parenting is absolutely necessary. And I don't think that you can rely on any external sources to tell you what you should do. So yeah, fair enough. This is all correct. This idea, though, of being lenient with ourselves, I really dislike this. I truly believe that every parent should hold themselves up to the highest possible standard that they can hold themselves up to. And that doesn't mean, to the point of self-flagellation where if you make a mistake, then suddenly you're depressed about it for weeks. Like, that's completely unreasonable. But I think it's this idea of trying to improve how you parent all the time. I think that is something to aspire towards. And I think that that's admirable. And I think it's usually like it's a good habit to try to have, that you aim for something that is greater than where you are now. And I don't just do what feels right. So the problem with this is that quite a lot of parenting is instinctive. And quite a lot of us were raised by parents who parented completely instinctively. And honestly, this is often why you end up with people, for example, being all pro corporal punishment, because that just in the moment that feels right. You don't have a toolkit that you can use for discipline that is maybe something that's a little bit kinder, that's a little bit more gentle, that's more in line with your values. Or if you were to sit down and think about how you want to parent, that's more in line with that idea. So I think that instinct sometimes can and does just lead you astray. And that's a real problem. And that's where external sources come in. So it's not about just following what other people say, but it's about recognizing where you have deficiencies in your parenting style and then trying to fix those. And so if I were OP and I had the same problem and I didn't have access to my husband, or maybe he had the same problem and he didn't know what to do about it, then I would try and find a whole bunch of sources and find a whole bunch of other more experienced people who knew a lot more about child psychology and how child psychology develops over time, to then try and use their insights to improve my parenting style so that it's better for my child. The next one says, this might be a good time to start teaching him coping strategies like deep breathing. You can model this and encourage him to use it himself. You can model this yourself when you're stressed too. Things like that. It's good to express emotions, but it's also good to learn to control them. There's some good books and videos that teach young children about emotions and coping. This is a good time to start building his feelings vocabulary too. When people can identify and name their feelings, it can help them manage them. I'm a therapist and I work with kids, and then she gives a recommendation for some books that make a difference for people. And no, I think that this is kind of the thing where if you actually provide kids with the tools to try and respond to the situation and to deal with it in a different way. Like, all you have provided, if you just pat them on the back when they cry, is you've reinforced the idea that crying is the right way to experience that emotion. And there's no, I don't have a fundamental problem with that. Like, sometimes crying happens, and I think it's okay to let kids express their emotions. But maybe if your child doesn't have any other ways of responding and you haven't shown him any other ways that he could respond, that's kind of why he's stuck here. The next one, it's a truly tough one. I have a bit of a motto that I want my son to be sympathetic and empathetic, but not pathetic. I make sure he knows it's okay to cry and equally talk about things if there's emotions happening, but if he doesn't want to talk about it, then he can tell me that too. Is he a good verbal communicator? Sometimes the emotions get too much for them to express, and it's frustration that makes them cry. I try things like, I can understand that you might feel upset or frustrated or annoyed by this. Is there something that you need from me? My son is 5.5, so a lot easier now, but I definitely remember when he was 3 and there was a lot of what you're describing. Boys have surges of testosterone sporadically, which also lead to additional emotional behaviors like this too. Now, I really, really love the line, I want my son to be sympathetic and empathetic, but not pathetic. And that just really rung true to me in terms of what type of person, what type of man you want to be able to raise as a mother. And raising a man who does cry at everything is not good for you or for your child or for him when he's a grown adult. So it's this idea of a certain amount of emotional regulation is absolutely essential. And men do need, like, I don't think that we would consider women to be pathetic. I mean, maybe we would, but I don't think that people would use quite the same words and describe women as pathetic if they were crybabies and cried all the time. I do wonder if you had a 3-year-old girl, like a 3-year-old daughter who cried all the time, would people have the same, like, would a mother have the same response to it? Where she's like, man, this was getting annoying. I need to teach her other ways of dealing with it. I'm just wondering, like, I think it would be good for emotional regulation to be something that you teach both sexes equally. But yeah, there's a lot that we can do as mothers, and there's a lot that we do as mothers where if you just follow only your maternal instincts, you can do a bit of damage as well. And so it's always good to try and regulate and to try and balance that out with a different style of parenting every now and then.